On June 22, 1941, Vladimir Filipovich Tributs met the war, commanding the Red Banner Baltic Fleet. A short man with a piercing gaze, who was only 41 years old at the time, took on his shoulders a responsibility unparalleled in the history of the Russian fleet. When German troops were rapidly approaching Leningrad, it was Tributs who made the decision that changed the course of the war in the northern direction. The ships of the Baltic Fleet were to become part of the city's defense. In those days, a legend was born about the Baltic naval commander who managed to turn naval power into a shield for the besieged city. Under his command, the Baltic sailors did not just hold the sea approaches to Leningrad. They turned ship artillery into a formidable weapon against enemy ground forces. Battleships and cruisers, deprived of the ability to maneuver in the narrow space of the Neva Bay, became stationary but deadly fortresses. Tributs, a hereditary peasant from Belarus, managed to find unconventional solutions in what seemed to be a hopeless situation. Vladimir Filipovich Tributs was born on July 28, 1900, in a Belarusian village in the St. Petersburg Governorate to a peasant family. His path to commanding the Baltic Fleet began in a difficult time for the country, immediately after the Civil War. At 19, he joined the Red Army, and in 1922, he tied his fate to the sea, enrolling in the Frunze Naval School in Petrograd. Young Vladimir displayed remarkable abilities in naval affairs. His instructors noted his mathematical mind, his ability to make quick decisions, and his natural leadership. Even then, they saw in him a future commander. After graduating from the school in 1926, Tributs received an appointment to the Baltic Fleet, with which his entire future destiny would be linked. His first years of officer service became a true school of naval practice for him. He successively held the positions of watch officer, gunner, and assistant commander of a destroyer. Each new step provided invaluable experience, which would later form his unique command style, a combination of technical literacy with tactical thinking. In the 1930s, Tributs' career developed rapidly. After graduating from the Naval Academy in 1932, he held various staff positions, where his talent as a strategist was revealed. His work in the operational department of the fleet's headquarters allowed him to view naval operations from the height of planning, to understand the interaction of various fleet forces. The year 1938 became decisive in his career, when Tributs was appointed Chief of Staff of the Baltic Fleet. In this position, he proved himself to be a brilliant organizer and analyst. He was distinguished by his ability to see the entire picture of combat operations, to anticipate the development of the situation, and to find unconventional solutions. In February 1939, an event occurred that determined the fate of the Soviet fleet for years to come. 38-year-old Vladimir Tributs was appointed commander of the Red Banner Baltic Fleet. This was an exceptional trust for such a young officer. The appointment coincided with a period of tense international relations and active rearmament of the fleet. The first serious test for the new commander was the Soviet-Finnish War. The Baltic Fleet, under Tributs' leadership, provided support to ground forces, fought against the Finnish fleet, and blockaded the coast. These operations became invaluable practice for him in managing large naval formations in combat conditions. In the pre-war years, Tributs paid much attention to the combat training of the fleet. He personally inspected exercises demanding maximum realism from commanders in working out tasks. He placed particular emphasis on the interaction of the fleet with ground forces and aviation, anticipating that a future war would require combined operations of all branches of the armed forces. By June 1941, the Baltic Fleet represented a formidable fighting force. It comprised 2 battleships, 2 cruisers, 19 destroyers, 65 submarines, and numerous auxiliary vessels. The main bases of the fleet were Tallinn, Liepaja, and Hanko, as well as Kronstadt and Leningrad. This geographic distribution of bases offered strategic advantages, but simultaneously created a vulnerability: stretched communications in the event of a sudden enemy attack. Vladimir Tributs, understanding the complexity of the international situation, devoted special attention to the fleet's combat readiness from the very first days of his command. He regularly conducted exercises under conditions as close as possible to actual combat. Sailors practiced repelling air raids, anti-mine defense, and artillery firing. Submariners were prepared with particular thoroughness. Tributs personally oversaw their training, understanding the strategic importance of the submarine fleet in the confined space of the Baltic Sea. In the spring of 1941, the commander initiated a program for modernizing coastal defenses. By his order, artillery batteries on the islands of the Gulf of Finland were strengthened, and surveillance and communication systems were improved. These measures, taken literally months before the war began, would later play a decisive role in the defense of the naval approaches to Leningrad. An important element of preparation was the creation of naval defensive districts. Tributs insisted on forming special units, including ships, coastal artillery, and marines, capable of independently holding key sections of the coast. This decision reflected his strategic vision. In the event of war, the fleet was not only to perform traditional naval tasks, but also to interact closely with ground forces. The commander was particularly concerned about the anti-aircraft defense of ships and bases. The experience of the war in Europe showed the increasing role of aviation in naval battles. At Tributs' initiative, anti-aircraft armament on ships was strengthened, and joint exercises with fighter aviation were conducted. He sought to increase the number of anti-aircraft guns and machine guns on all classes of ships, which subsequently saved many lives. On the eve of the war, the Baltic Fleet was tasked with being ready for mine-laying operations. Tributs personally supervised the preparation of minefields that were to block approaches to Soviet bases. Naval formations practiced the rapid deployment of minefields, and technical services prepared stocks of various types of mines. This work was carried out under strict secrecy. Despite all efforts, serious problems remained. There was a shortage of modern radar stations, and there were difficulties with fuel and ammunition. Tributs repeatedly appealed to the People's Commissariat of the Navy with requests to expedite the delivery of necessary equipment. He understood that time was against them and strove to make the most of every day of peaceful respite. On June 22, 1941, at 4 o'clock in the morning, the peaceful silence of the Baltic Fleet's bases was shattered by the roar of German bombs. The war, which Vladimir Tributs had anticipated but hoped to postpone, began suddenly and rapidly. In the very first minutes, the commander made a decision that many historians would later call salvific for the fleet: to immediately declare combat alert and disperse the ships. From his office in Tallinn, Tributs instantly assessed the scale of the threat. By his order, just 40 minutes after the bombing began, minefields started to be laid in the Gulf of Finland. Destroyers and mine layers went out to sea under enemy fire, carrying out the task that the commander considered paramount: to block enemy access to the fleet's main bases. In those first days, the war for the Baltic Fleet unfolded quite differently from pre-war plans. Tributs faced a reality that demanded immediate and unconventional solutions. German troops advanced rapidly by land, threatening to cut off naval bases from the main forces. In this situation, the commander decided to create a system of mobile defense using ship artillery to support ground troops. One of the most dramatic moments of the initial period of the war was the defense of the naval base in Libava. Baltic sailors, under Tributs' personal leadership, fought for every inch of land, allowing valuable equipment to be evacuated and some ships to be withdrawn. The commander personally coordinated the garrison's actions, being on the front line under enemy fire. His presence inspired the defenders, and clear orders allowed for effective resistance, despite the overwhelming enemy superiority. By the end of June, it became clear that holding the forward bases was impossible. Tributs made the difficult but necessary decision to withdraw the main forces of the fleet to Tallinn and Kronstadt. At the same time, he insisted on maintaining the garrison on the Hanko Peninsula, which became an impregnable outpost, tying down significant enemy forces. In the first weeks of the war, Tributs' special talent manifested itself, the ability to improvise and find solutions in seemingly hopeless situations. When German aviation began massive raids on ships, he ordered the use of smokescreens and force dispersion, which significantly reduced the effectiveness of enemy bombardments. When there was a threat of German submarines breaking through to Leningrad, anti-submarine lines were promptly created at his command, using net barriers and patrol boats. Tributs paid special attention to interaction with ground forces. Already in July 1941, the Baltic Fleet's ship artillery began to deliver powerful strikes against advancing German columns. The battleship Quote and the cruiser Quote 1, under the personal leadership of the commander, conducted a series of successful shellings of German equipment concentrations, forcing the enemy to change their offensive routes. By August 1941, the situation in the Baltic had become critical. German troops approached Tallinn closely, threatening the fleet's main base. Under these conditions, Tributs developed an evacuation plan, which later entered naval art textbooks as an example of courage and strategic thinking. Despite colossal difficulties and losses, the main forces of the fleet were preserved for further struggle. The first months of the war became a time of gravest trials and most important lessons for Vladimir Tributs. He understood that in conditions of enemy air and land superiority, traditional naval combat tactics were inapplicable. The fleet had to become part of the overall defense system to turn into a powerful artillery fist capable of supporting ground troops. These conclusions formed the basis of the strategy that subsequently allowed the Baltic Fleet to play a decisive role in the defense of Leningrad. By September 1941, the situation in Leningrad had become critical. German troops had closed the blockade ring from land, and the Gulf of Finland remained the only corridor connecting the city to the mainland. Under these circumstances, Vladimir Tributs made a strategic decision that historians would later call brilliant, to transform the ships of the Baltic Fleet into floating fortresses, defending the city's maritime approaches. In his command post on Vasilyevsky Island, the admiral leaned over maps, marking out the firing sectors for naval artillery. He understood. Traditional naval combat tactics were inapplicable in these conditions. A unified system had to be created where each ship became an element of the overall defense. Tributs said at a meeting of unit commanders, his plan envisioned an echeloned defense from Kronstadt to Leningrad. The battleships and 2 took up positions near Kronstadt, their 12-inch guns capable of hitting targets up to 30 kilometers away. The cruiser stood on the Neva, its artillery controlling the southern approaches to the city. Tributs paid special attention to mine artillery defense. By his order, multi-row minefields were laid in the Gulf of Finland. Several lines of anti-submarine net barriers were deployed between Kronstadt and Leningrad. Coastal artillery on the islands of the Gulf of Finland was reinforced with guns removed from ships that could not actively operate under blockade conditions. A unique solution was the creation of naval artillery groups. Tributs ordered the unification of fire control for ships, coastal batteries, and field artillery into a single system. Each group had its sector of responsibility and could concentrate fire on threatened directions. Observation posts on Leningrad's high-rise buildings and special adjustment posts on the front line were used for fire correction. Understanding that the enemy would seek to destroy ships from the air, the admiral developed an air defense system. Anti-aircraft batteries were placed around ship anchorages, and fighters constantly patrolled the waters. Smokescreens and false positions, mock-ups of warships that diverted German airstrikes, were used for camouflage. A particular feature of the defense was the active use of naval infantry. At Tributs' initiative, naval rifle brigades were formed, staffed by sailors from ships that could not go to sea due to the blockade. These units took up positions in the most threatened areas of the coast, becoming a reliable shield against German troops attempting to break through to the city along the Gulf's shore. Coordination with ground forces required special attention. Tributs personally met with the commander of the Leningrad front, coordinating defense plans. Special groups of liaison officers were created at the fleet headquarters who were stationed at the headquarters of the armies defending Leningrad. This allowed for the rapid redeployment of naval artillery to support ground units. When German tanks were breaking through to Leningrad, Admiral Tributs made a decision that changed the course of the battle. The heavy ships of the Baltic Fleet were to become artillery batteries of unprecedented power. On September 8, 1941, the battleship Murat fired its first salvo at German positions. 12-inch guns, designed for naval battles, rained half-ton shells upon the enemy. The earth trembled under the blows of these naval giants. Tributs developed a unique fire control system. Spotters with radio stations were positioned on tall buildings in Leningrad, while special artillery reconnaissance groups operated at the front line. The fleet's artillery headquarters transformed into a true nerve center of defense, where every enemy movement was marked on large-scale maps. When the German 5th Panzer Division attempted to break through to the Pulkovo Heights, it was the naval artillery that halted the Wehrmacht's armored fist. The cruiser Kirov, stationed near the Admiralty, fired direct salvos with visibility provided by observation balloons lifted above the city. According to the recollections of captured German officers, they were stunned by the accuracy and power of the strikes from the sea. They had never experienced anything like it on other fronts. Tributs personally controlled ammunition consumption, understanding that in blockade conditions, every shell was worth its weight in gold. He developed a system for economical ammunition expenditure. Firing was conducted only at confirmed targets. Medium-caliber guns were used to destroy lightly armored vehicles, and heavy artillery conserved its strength for repelling massive attacks. Nighttime firing proved particularly effective. The Germans, accustomed to quiet after dark, suddenly found themselves under a hail of fire from ships invisible in the darkness. Illuminating shells and searchlights were used to light up the battlefield. These fiery raids, as Tributs called them, not only inflicted material damage, but also Ulm's enemies' morale. An important element of the system was the mobility of fire support. Destroyers and gunboats could quickly change positions, appearing where they were least expected. German intelligence reported, quote, that suddenly opened fire and disappeared before enemy artillery could respond. When the Germans launched their final assault on the city in October 1941, naval artillery played a decisive role in repelling the attack. The battleships, quote, and 5 fired area barrages, destroying enemy reserves, while destroyers unleashed a hail of fire on advanced units. After this defeat, the German command abandoned plans for an assault and switched to a prolonged siege. The Germans made desperate attempts to destroy the ships of the Baltic Fleet. Luftwaffe aviation carried out massive raids, during which the battleship, quote, 6 sustained heavy damage. However, even a half-sunk ship continued to fire at the enemy. Tributs ordered, quote, by the end of 1941, the Baltic Fleet's naval artillery had destroyed over 200 tanks, hundreds of artillery pieces, and thousands of enemy soldiers. In essence, a fiery barrier was created that the Germans were unable to overcome. Hitler's plan for a lightning capture of Leningrad was thwarted, largely due to the strategic vision of Admiral Tributs, who transformed ships into impregnable fortresses. By the autumn of 1941, the Baltic Fleet found itself in an unprecedented situation, caught in a vice between enemy-controlled land and a narrow strip of the Gulf of Finland. Vladimir Tributs faced a problem that no naval commander in history had ever solved: how to maintain the combat readiness of a large naval force in conditions of almost complete lack of maneuverability. The geographical trap grew tighter and tighter. From the west, German and Finnish forces controlled most of the Gulf of Finland. From the north, Finnish batteries shelled the waters. And from the south, German forces reached the coast. The fleet's operational space was reduced to a narrow corridor between Kronstadt and Leningrad. These words of Tributs became the motto of the Baltic sailors. The commander developed a basing system that minimized losses from air raids. Ships constantly changed their mooring locations, utilizing natural shelters, small bays, river mouths. Special booms and net barriers were constructed for battleships and cruisers, protecting them from torpedoes and saboteurs. Mines posed a particular danger. German aviation regularly dropped them into fairways. Tributs created a unique mine defense system. Minesweepers worked around the clock, clearing passages for warships. New sweeping methods were developed, taking into account the specifics of the shallow waters of the Neva Bay. Every morning, before ships departed, special search boats inspected the fairways. The problem of fuel supply became one of the most acute. Fuel oil reserves dwindled, and the delivery of new batches through the blockade was extremely difficult. Tributs decided to convert some small ships to solid fuel, wood and coal. For destroyers and cruisers, a strict economy regime was introduced. They went to sea only for combat missions, and at anchor, they used shore power. German aviation turned daylight hours into a period of mortal danger for ships. Tributs reconfigured the fleet's operational mode. Main movements and operations were carried out during nighttime. Special camouflage measures were developed for nighttime navigation, allowing ships to see each other while remaining invisible to the enemy. The commander understood that in confined spaces, every ship became a vulnerable target. He ordered the anti-aircraft armament of all vessels to be strengthened, even at the cost of dismantling part of the main artillery. Additional anti-aircraft guns appeared on the decks of battleships and cruisers, and small ships were literally bristling with machine guns. Unconventional solutions were also used to protect against aviation. Tributs ordered smoke apparatuses to be installed on ships, capable of enveloping the entire fleet in a dense curtain in minutes. False positions were created, mock-ups of warships, equipped with a minimum amount of anti-aircraft weapons, which diverted Luftwaffe strikes. Special attention was paid to submarines, the only ships capable of breaking through enemy barriers. Tributs personally participated in developing routes for submarines through minefields. Special training complexes were created for submariners, where actions in the conditions of anti-submarine nets and shallow depths of the Gulf of Finland were practiced. In the winter of 1941-1942, the fleet faced a new problem: ice. The Gulf of Finland froze, trapping the ships. But Tributs turned this problem into an advantage. By his order, artillery positions were equipped on the ice, where guns from ships were moved. These ice batteries could change positions, remaining invulnerable to enemy artillery. Under blockade conditions, the problem of repairing damaged ships became critical. Tributs organized a unique ship repair system. In Leningrad factories, despite bombings and shellings, the production of spare parts for ships continued. Mobile repair teams were created, capable of performing work directly at combat positions. When materials were scarce, parts from damaged ships were used. Thus, the practice of donor ships was born. To solve the problem of limited maneuverability, Tributs developed the tactic of rolling fire. Ships, operating in small groups, successively changed positions, creating the impression for the enemy of much larger forces. This tactic allowed for resource conservation and minimized the risk of losses from return fire. For communication between ships and headquarters in conditions of radio silence, a system of light signaling using special codes was created. At night, infrared searchlights, invisible to the enemy, were used, and during the day, signal flags and flashing lights. Despite all the difficulties, Tributs maintained the high morale of the sailors. He often appeared on ships, talked with crews, and personally presented awards to those who distinguished themselves. On his initiative, concert brigades were created in the fleet, performing for sailors right at combat positions. These seemingly small details were of great importance for maintaining morale in the most difficult conditions of the blockade. The autumn of 1941 became a critical period for besieged Leningrad. The encirclement ring tightened, food supplies dwindled, and the city's population faced the threat of starvation and bombardments. Under these circumstances, Vladimir Tributs made one of the most important decisions: to use the ships of the Baltic Fleet not only for defense, but also for saving people. Sea routes became the last hope for thousands of Leningraders. The first evacuation operations began in August, when it became clear that the German ring around the city would inevitably close. Tributs personally developed the routes for the ships, taking into account all risk factors: enemy aircraft, artillery shelling, minefields. He understood that every voyage was a gamble with death, but there was no other way. The admiral instructed the ship commanders at an emergency meeting at the fleet headquarters. All available vessels were used for the evacuation, from warships to fishing boats and barges. Each vessel was refitted to accommodate the maximum number of passengers. The Ladoga military flotilla played a special role in the evacuation. By Tributs' order, a crossing across Lake Ladoga was organized in the shortest possible time. The route across Ladoga became a true road of life, the only artery connecting besieged Leningrad with the mainland. Gunboats, tugboats, and barges plied between the western and eastern shores of the lake day and night, evacuating exhausted city residents. Tributs understood that ordinary transport ships were too vulnerable to enemy aircraft. By his order, anti-aircraft machine guns were installed on barges and boats, and special groups of warships were allocated to cover the convoys. Each voyage was accompanied by patrol boats ready to repel air attacks. Organizing the loading of evacuees required precise coordination. Tributs created a special evacuation headquarters that collaborated with the city authorities. Fleet officers worked at the piers, regulating the flow of people. Priority was given to children, the sick, and the wounded, followed by women and the elderly. Marine infantry units were involved to maintain order. Evacuation was particularly difficult in the autumn months, when storms began on Ladoga. Waves up to 2 meters high crashed against the small, overcrowded vessels. Tributs ordered captains to hug the shore during stormy conditions, even if it increased travel time and the risk of shelling. The safety of the evacuees was more important than speed. When German aircraft intensified their raids on convoys, the Admiral developed a system of night crossings. Ships departed at nightfall, moving without lights, guided by special radio beacons installed on the eastern shore of Ladoga. Special luminous buoys, visible only from a short distance, were used for navigation. With the onset of winter, a new problem arose: ice. Ladoga began to freeze, threatening a complete halt to the evacuation. Tributs immediately organized ice reconnaissance. Special groups of sailor scouts on skis explored the ice, determining possible routes. As soon as the ice thickness reached 20 centimeters, the organization of the ice track began, the legendary Road of Life. Fleet specialists, under Tributs' leadership, developed a unique system of navigational equipment for the ice track. Beacons with battery-powered lanterns were installed along the road. Special road maintenance sections were created to service the track, where Baltic sailors were on duty around the clock. Danger was posed not only by German bombers, but also by ice shifts. Cracks often formed, into which vehicles with evacuees fell. Tributs ordered the creation of emergency rescue stations along the entire route. Baltic divers in icy water rescued drowning people and salvaged sunken cargo from the bottom. In the winter of 1941-1942, over 500,000 people were evacuated across Ladoga. Many of them were on the verge of exhaustion and would not have survived in the besieged city. Tributs personally supervised the organization of medical posts on the eastern shore of Ladoga, where evacuees received first aid. In the spring of 1942, when the ice on Ladoga began to melt, Tributs reconfigured the evacuation system. Special amphibious transports, capable of moving both on water and ice, were prepared. During the spring thaw, these vehicles ensured the continuity of the evacuation. The Admiral showed particular concern for the evacuation of children. At his initiative, improved conditions were created on ships carrying groups of children. Improvised sleeping places were equipped and hot meals were organized. Sailors gave their rations and warm clothing to the children. Many sailors later recalled how, before their eyes, stern Baltic men transformed into caring nannies. The underwater forces of the Baltic Fleet, under the command of Vladimir Tributs, became a true nightmare for German shipping during the Leningrad blockade. Operating in incredibly difficult conditions, Soviet submarines turned into invisible hunters who, despite minefields and anti-submarine barriers, inflicted sensitive blows on enemy communications. At the beginning of the war, the Baltic Fleet included 65 submarines of various classes. However, with the establishment of the Leningrad blockade, most of them found themselves trapped in the eastern part of the Gulf of Finland. Tributs understood. To effectively fight German shipping, submarines had to break through into the open Baltic Sea. In the autumn of '41, the Admiral personally summoned the commanders of the submarine forces. In a small office on Vasilyevsky Island, leaning over maps, he outlined the situation. "The enemy believes he has bottled us up. Our task is to prove otherwise." Tributs developed a unique operation for submarines to break through enemy mine net barriers. For this, a special fairways reconnaissance system was created. Small boats and minesweepers would go out on reconnaissance under the cover of night, determining the location of minefields and net barriers. The collected data was plotted on maps, which were then handed over to submarine commanders. Special attention was paid to crew training. On Tributs' initiative, a training ground was established in Kronstadt, where submariners practiced actions in extreme situations, passing through minefields, overcoming net barriers, and emergency diving when detected by the enemy. Training was conducted in conditions as close as possible to combat, often under real bombings and artillery shellings. The first breakthrough of a submarine through the barriers occurred in October '41. The submarine, quote, under the command of Captain Lieutenant Sergei Preobrazhensky, successfully overcame 3 lines of mine barriers and entered the open Baltic Sea. Tributs personally escorted the boat and then anxiously awaited reports on the results of the mission. 3 weeks later, the quote returned, having sunk 2 enemy transports. This success inspired the commander to organize systematic work of the submarine forces. He created a special control group that coordinated the actions of all submarines. Each boat was assigned its own area of operations, and optimal routes and return points were developed. Tributs insisted on the introduction of new tactics. Submarines were to operate not only with torpedo weapons, but also with artillery, surfacing at night to shell small enemy vessels. Winter missions were particularly difficult. Ice shackled the waters of the Gulf of Finland, limiting the maneuver of submarines. Tributs ordered the equipping of special winter bases where boats could shelter under the ice, surfacing only through specially cut ice holes. Heaters and special chemical compositions were used to keep the ice holes from freezing. In the spring of '42, the commander developed a new strategy for the submarine forces. Now, boats went out to sea in groups of 2 or 3 units, which allowed them to mutually ensure safety and increased the effectiveness of target search. A system of coded hydroacoustic signals was developed for communication between boats, allowing them to exchange information without surfacing. Tributs introduced the practice of, quote, a tactic where several submarines attacked an enemy convoy simultaneously from different directions. This disoriented the escort ships and significantly increased the chances of success. The first such attack on a German convoy in July '42 resulted in the sinking of 4 transports and a tanker. To provide submarines with intelligence, the Admiral created a special air group. Reconnaissance aircraft made daily flights over the Baltic, recording the routes of German convoys. The information received was immediately transmitted to the submarines at sea. This allowed submarine commanders to reach attack positions in advance. When the Germans strengthened their anti-submarine defenses, installing hydrophones and increasing the number of escort ships, Tributs developed new breakthrough methods. Submarines began to use, quote, areas where enemy hydroacoustic stations worked inefficiently due to the peculiarities of the seabed relief or water temperature layers. Commanders received special maps indicating such zones. Special attention was paid to the camouflage of submarines. By Tributs' order, special devices were installed on submarines to create false targets, imitators of propeller and hull noises. This allowed distracting enemy anti-submarine ships, sending them on a false trail, while the submarine moved in the opposite direction. Amphibious operations became a special chapter in the history of the Baltic Fleet under the command of Vladimir Tributs. Under blockade conditions, when every meter of coastline held strategic significance, the Admiral developed a unique tactic of sudden strikes against the enemy's rear from the sea. These operations not only inflicted material damage on the Germans, but also created constant tension along the entire front line, forcing the enemy to disperse forces. The first amphibious operations began in the autumn of 1941. Tributs personally developed the plans, choosing the most vulnerable sections of the coast. He understood, the main advantage of an amphibious landing is surprise. Therefore, operations were prepared in the strictest secrecy. Even ship commanders learned of the specific target only a few hours before the start. This principle became the basis of the Baltic sailors' amphibious tactics. Dark, moonless nights and bad weather were used for landings. The landing parties trained to descend storm ladders in complete darkness with full gear. Every movement was practiced until it became automatic. A distinctive feature of Tributs' amphibious operations was close cooperation with partisan detachments. Before a landing, reconnaissance groups were sent into the operation area to establish contact with local partisans. They gathered information about the location of German units, the coastal defense system, and minefields. Based on this data, the landing plans were adjusted. Tributs developed a special system of fire support for the landings. Naval artillery delivered powerful strikes against coastal fortifications directly before the landing. Then, shallow draft boats, which could approach close to the shore, entered the fray. They fired direct fire, suppressing enemy strongpoints. Only after this did assault groups of Marines rush ashore. One of the most successful was the amphibious operation in the Peterhof area in October 1941. A detachment of Baltic sailors landed on the German-occupied coast and for several hours fought in the enemy's rear, destroying an artillery battery and the headquarters of an infantry regiment. This operation forced the German command to transfer significant forces to guard the coast, thereby weakening the pressure on the frontline defense of Leningrad. In 1942, the scale of amphibious operations expanded. Tributs created special amphibious detachments staffed by volunteers. These fighters underwent special training, which included hand-to-hand combat, mine demolition, and land navigation. Many of them spoke German, which allowed for reconnaissance by fire and the capture of tongues, prisoners for interrogation. A unique feature of the Baltic Fleet's amphibious operations was the use of submarines to deliver reconnaissance and sabotage groups. At Tributs' initiative, special compartments were equipped on several submarines to accommodate combat swimmers. These groups landed on the coast several days before the main landing and prepared a bridgehead, destroying patrols, mining roads along which reinforcements could approach. In the spring of 1943, Tributs developed a plan for a series of coordinated amphibious operations along the entire southern coast of the Gulf of Finland. These actions coincided with the general offensive of Soviet troops and created in the enemy the impression of a breakthrough by large naval forces. The German command was forced to keep significant reserves in the coastal strip, which could have been used in other sectors of the front. The Baltic landings were highly effective. During the blockade, more than 50 amphibious operations of various scales were carried out. They allowed for the destruction of dozens of enemy artillery batteries, disruption of the coastal defense system, and the capture of hundreds of prisoners and valuable intelligence. But most importantly, these operations created a constant threat to the German rear, forcing the enemy to live in constant tension. Operation Iskra, the breaching of the siege of Leningrad in January 1943, marked a turning point in the fate of the beleaguered city. The Baltic Fleet, under the command of Vladimir Tributs, played a decisive role in this battle. Already in November 1942, the admiral was summoned to Smolny, where he was presented with the overall plan for the offensive operation. Tributs, after carefully studying the map, immediately recognized the key task for the fleet: to provide powerful artillery support to the advancing troops. Our artillery must pave the way for the infantry. These words of Tributs became the leitmotif of the fleet's preparation for the operation. The commander personally developed a fire plan that was astonishing in its detail. Each ship, each battery was assigned its own sector of fire and specific targets. Preparation began in an atmosphere of strict secrecy. By order of Tributs, ships and coastal batteries changed positions only at night, camouflaging themselves from enemy aerial reconnaissance. Separate shots were used for ranging, disguised as ordinary harassing fire, so as not to arouse suspicion among the Germans. Particular attention was paid to coordination with ground forces. Tributs dispatched experienced naval artillery officers with radio stations to the Army command posts. A unified target designation system was developed. Observers from the front line could call for naval artillery fire on specific targets within minutes. On the eve of the operation, the admiral held a final meeting with the commanders of ships and batteries. In a small bunker on Vasilyevsky Island, he addressed the officers. "Tomorrow the fate of Leningrad will be decided. Every shell must find its target. The lives of thousands of soldiers and the success of the breakthrough depend on the accuracy of our fire." On January 12, 1943, at 9:30 in the morning, signal flares rose over the Neva. At the same moment, the guns of the Baltic Fleet opened hurricane fire on enemy positions. The battleship Oktyabrskaya Revolutsiya, the cruiser Kirov, destroyers, and coastal batteries created unprecedented firepower. More than 200 large-caliber barrels pounded pre-reconnoitered targets. Tributs was at the fleet's command post, from where he directed this grand artillery symphony. Every 15 minutes, he received reports on the results of the firing and adjusted the fire. The volleys against the Germans' fortified strongholds in the Schlisselburg area and the Sinyavino Heights proved particularly effective. The Germans tried to suppress the ship's fire with their artillery and aviation, but Tributs had foreseen this as well. By his order, the ships constantly changed positions, and a powerful air defense system was created to protect against aviation. The fleet's anti-aircraft gunners shot down 11 German planes on the first day of the operation, which had attempted to attack the ships. Railroad batteries, which Tributs personally prepared for the operation, played a special role in the breakthrough of the blockade. These mobile artillery systems could quickly change positions, avoiding enemy return fire. Their half-ton shells literally plowed through German fortifications, opening the way for the advancing infantry. When the troops of the Leningrad and Volkhov fronts went on the offensive, naval artillery fire shifted forward, creating a wall of fire in front of the advancing units. German soldiers, stunned and demoralized by the powerful explosions of naval shells, often surrendered without resistance. Prisoners later recounted that they had never been subjected to such powerful and accurate fire. To adjust artillery fire, Tributs engaged fleet aviation. Light spotter planes patrolled over the battlefield, transmitting precise target coordinates. This allowed for rapid shifting of fire to identified strong points and concentrations of enemy equipment. For the first time in the history of the war, naval artillery operated with such precision in support of ground forces. The battles for Schlisselburg were particularly intense. The Germans had turned the city into a powerful fortified area with concrete pillboxes and multi-layered defenses. By order of Tributs, the battleship Oktyabrskaya Revolutsiya concentrated the fire of its 12-inch guns on this sector. Half-ton shells literally leveled German fortifications. When Soviet infantry entered the city, they found a surreal scene. Concrete pillboxes, torn from the ground like matchboxes. Simultaneously with artillery support, Tributs organized the logistical support for the operation. By his order, dozens of small vessels and boats were prepared for transporting troops, ammunition, and evacuating the wounded across the Neva. These vessels worked around the clock, despite shelling and bombing. Baltic sailors displayed miracles of heroism, delivering ammunition to the front line under enemy fire. When the troops of the Leningrad and Volkhov fronts linked up on January 18, 1943, breaking the blockade, Tributs did not allow himself to relax. He understood that the resulting corridor, only 8 to 10 kilometers wide, remained vulnerable to enemy counterattacks. By his order, naval artillery continued to shell the flanks of the corridor, preventing the Germans from bringing up reserves for a counteroffensive. To consolidate the success, Tributs organized tactical landings on the southern shore of Lake Ladoga. Marine infantry units captured important strongholds, disrupted enemy communications, and created panic in their rear. These actions diverted significant German forces, preventing them from concentrating for a counterattack on the breakthrough corridor. In the shortest possible time, by order of Tributs, a supply system was established through the broken blockade. Boats and barges of the Ladoga flotilla delivered food, medicine, and ammunition to Leningrad. Thanks to the clear organization of sea transport, by February 1943, it was possible to significantly increase the bread rations for the city's residents. The breakthrough of the blockade became a personal triumph for Admiral Tributs as a naval commander. His ability to organize the interaction of the fleet with ground forces, the precision of planning fire destruction, and the ability to quickly react to changes in the situation. All this ensured the success of the operation. For leading the fleet's actions during the breakthrough of the siege of Leningrad, Vladimir Filipovich Tributs was awarded the Order of Ushakov, First Degree, the highest award for naval commanders. After the breakthrough of the blockade, Tributs did not rest on his laurels. He immediately began preparations for the next stage, the complete liberation of Leningrad from the blockade. Ships and coastal batteries regrouped, replenished ammunition, and refined targeting systems. The admiral understood. Many heavy battles lay ahead, and the fleet had to be ready for new trials. The winter of 1941 became the severest trial for besieged Leningrad. Food supplies were depleted, fuel was scarce, and temperatures dropped to 30 degrees below zero. Under these conditions, Admiral Vladimir Tributs made a decision that many considered impossible: to organize the city's supply across the ice cover of Lake Ladoga. Thus, the legendary quote was born. These words of Tributs became a turning point in the history of the blockade. Already in November 41, when the ice on Ladoga had barely reached 15 centimeters thick, he gave the order for ice reconnaissance to begin. Special groups of Baltic sailors on skis explored the freezing waters, determining the ice's strength and possible routes of movement. Tributs personally oversaw the creation of the ice road. Understanding that ordinary road services could not cope with such a task, he allocated naval engineering units and hydrographer specialists for its construction. They marked the route with stakes, set up landmarks for navigation in fog and blizzard, and established warming stations and medical aid points. Cracks and polynyas, constantly appearing in the ice due to currents and wind loads, presented particular difficulty. At Tributs' instruction, emergency rescue teams equipped with specialized gear for rescuing people and vehicles from the icy water were on duty along the route. Naval divers, in the most severe conditions with water temperatures near 0 degrees, descended under the ice to retrieve sunken cargo. When the first convoys of food trucks began moving along the ice road at the end of November 41, German aviation attempted to paralyze the movement. Enemy bombers made up to 100 sorties a day, trying to destroy the ice road. Tributs immediately organized anti-aircraft defense for the route. Anti-aircraft batteries removed from ships were positioned on the shores and islands of Ladoga. Baltic Fleet fighters patrolled over the road, engaging in combat with German planes. The admiral understood that one route was not enough. A whole transport system needed to be created. By his order, several parallel roads were laid at different distances from each other. If one of them was damaged by bombing or ice shifts, traffic was rerouted to backup routes. Road maintenance sections were created to service the routes, where repair crews were on duty around the clock. Tributs paid special attention to camouflaging the ice road. Movement along the route was carried out mainly at night, with vehicles driving with darkened headlights. To disorient German pilots, false roads with light imitations of movement were created. In some sections, the ice was sprinkled with peat and ash, making the route invisible from the air. By January 42, the capacity of the ice road reached 4,000 tons of cargo per day. Food, ammunition, fuel and medicine went to Leningrad. In the opposite direction, factory equipment, cultural valuables, the wounded and exhausted residents were evacuated. Every gram of food delivered to the besieged city counted. Thanks to these supplies, the bread ration for Leningraders was slightly increased. With the onset of spring, a new threat emerged: the melting of the ice. Tributs ordered the creation of special hydrometeorological posts that measured ice thickness hourly and predicted its condition. When the ice began to weaken, strict restrictions on vehicle weight and speed were introduced on the route. To lighten the vehicles, everything superfluous, including doors and fenders, was removed. Simultaneously with the operation of the ice road, Tributs prepared for summer navigation. At his initiative, construction of new berths and tort facilities began on the eastern and western shores of Ladoga. Repair crews restored damaged vessels, preparing them for the opening of navigation. Hydrographers marked safe fairways, bypassing enemy minefields. In the spring of '42, when the ice road ceased operation due to melting ice, it was replaced by a water route. Barges, tugboats, and cutters began transportation across Ladoga. Tributs personally supervised the formation of convoys and their protection from enemy aircraft. Gunboats and armored cutters armed with anti-aircraft machine guns were allocated to cover the vessels. When the question of winter navigation arose again in the autumn of '42, the experience of the previous winter made it possible to organize the operation of the ice road much more efficiently. Now the road had concrete ramps onto the ice, permanent warming stations, and technical assistance points. The carrying capacity of the route increased to 7,000 tons per day, which significantly improved the city's supply. By the spring of 1944, the strategic situation in the Baltic Sea had radically changed. Soviet troops, having broken the siege of Leningrad, began the liberation of the coastal territories of the Gulf of Finland and advanced towards the borders of the Baltic states. For Vladimir Tributs, the moment he had awaited for long months of the blockade arrived. The opportunity to shift the Baltic Fleet from defense to decisive offensive operations. In his command post, the admiral bent over new operational maps. Now, arrows of offense pointing westward appeared on them. "The time has come to restore freedom to the sea," Tributs said at a meeting of the fleet's command staff. His plan envisioned the comprehensive use of all Baltic Fleet forces to support advancing armies and pursue the retreating enemy. The first large-scale offensive operation was the liberation of the Gulf of Finland coast. Tributs developed a unique scheme for the interaction of the fleet and ground forces. Ships moved along the coast parallel to the advancing units, providing them with fire support and protecting them from flanking enemy attacks from the sea. Destroyers and gunboats approached the shore at minimal distance and fired direct shots at German fortifications. The admiral paid special attention to reconnaissance. By his order, special reconnaissance and sabotage groups were formed from sailors who knew the coast well. These detachments landed ashore behind the front line and gathered information about the location of German batteries, minefields, and fortifications. The data was immediately transmitted to the fleet's command post, where Tributs personally analyzed it and adjusted the offensive plans. An innovative solution was the use of small submarine chasers and torpedo boats for raids behind enemy lines. These high-speed vessels suddenly appeared near German-occupied ports, shelled warehouses and piers, and then swiftly departed before the enemy could organize a counterattack. Such raids disorganized the German defense system and created constant tension along the entire coast. When the Soviet offensive in Karelia began in June 1944, Tributs organized powerful artillery support from the sea. Battleships and cruisers which had been anchored in Kronstadt for many months, now had the opportunity to maneuver and fire at new targets. Their 12- and 8-inch guns literally plowed through Finnish fortifications, opening the way for the advancing infantry. Simultaneously with artillery support, Tributs organized a series of amphibious operations on the Finnish coast. Marine infantry units landed behind enemy lines, captured key points, and cut off retreat routes. Particularly successful was the landing on an island in Vyborg Bay, where a battalion of Marines captured a coastal battery overnight and took more than 200 Finnish soldiers prisoner. With the Soviet troops reaching Narva Bay, the operation to liberate the Estonian coast began. Tributs developed a plan for a combined strike. Army units advanced from land, ships provided support from the sea, and fleet aviation provided air cover. This three-dimensional pressure prevented the enemy from organizing a stable defense. Submarines of the Baltic Fleet played a special role in the liberation of the Baltic territories. By Tributs' order, they blockaded enemy sea communications, preventing the German command from evacuating troops and equipment by sea. The submariners acted boldly and effectively. In the summer of 1944 alone, they sank more than 50 enemy transports and warships. When Soviet troops reached Tallinn, Tributs organized a large amphibious operation on the Paldiski Peninsula. Marines, landing from the sea, attacked German fortifications from the rear, while ground units advanced from the front. This combined strike led to the rapid liberation of an important bridgehead, which accelerated the fall of Tallinn. After the liberation of the Estonian capital, the Baltic Fleet gained the opportunity to use new bases for offensive operations. Tributs immediately redeployed part of the light forces to Tallinn, which significantly expanded the fleet's operating area. Now, torpedo boats and submarines could reach even remote areas of the Baltic Sea, threatening German communications off the coast of Germany. In the autumn of 1944, when Soviet troops approached Riga, Tributs developed a plan for a naval blockade of the enemy's Courland grouping. Baltic Fleet ships blocked sea routes, depriving the Germans of the ability to receive reinforcements and evacuate troops. Simultaneously, fleet aviation struck ports and airfields in Courland, destroying the enemy's last opportunities for maneuver. The naval art of Vladimir Tributs as a naval commander was forged from a unique combination of classical maritime strategy and innovative solutions born in the extreme conditions of the blockade. His command talent was revealed precisely when traditional methods of naval warfare proved inapplicable. Faced with a situation where the fleet was confined to the narrow space of the eastern part of the Gulf of Finland, Tributs displayed a rare quality: strategic flexibility of thought. One of the key elements of his command style was the ability to see the overall picture of the battle. From his headquarters on Vasilyevsky Island, the admiral could spend hours studying maps, analyzing possible enemy actions, and preparing asymmetric responses. Staff officers recalled how Tributs, bent over a map, would quietly say, "They expect us to do this, so we will do it differently." A notable feature of Tributs as a strategist was his ability to turn disadvantages into advantages. When ships lost the ability to maneuver, he transformed them into powerful floating batteries. When the Gulf of Finland froze over in winter, the admiral organized ice artillery positions. Every problem became for him not an obstacle, but a new opportunity to strike the enemy. In his relations with subordinates, Tributs showed a rare combination of demandingness and care. He could sternly reprimand a commander for failing to execute an order, but he never humiliated the dignity of officers, especially in the presence of sailors. The admiral understood well that under blockade conditions, the morale of the crews was as much a weapon as shells and torpedoes. Tributs' ability to make unconventional decisions in critical situations was particularly evident. When, in September 41, German troops approached Tallinn closely, threatening to encircle the main base of the fleet, the admiral decided to evacuate by sea. The operation was carried out under exceptionally difficult conditions, under airstrikes, through minefields, in stormy weather. Despite heavy losses, the main forces of the fleet were preserved, which subsequently played a decisive role in the defense of Leningrad. No less important quality of Tributs as a naval commander was his ability to establish interaction with the ground command. At the beginning of the war, friction often arose between the Army and the Navy, related to differences in tactics and operational thinking. Tributs managed to overcome these barriers by establishing direct contact with the Army commanders defending Leningrad. He personally met with generals, explained the capabilities of the fleet, and coordinated joint actions. To coordinate with ground forces, Tributs created special groups of naval liaison officers who were stationed at Army headquarters and adjusted the fire of naval artillery. This system allowed for prompt response to changes in the situation and concentration of the fleet's firepower in threatened directions. Largely thanks to this innovation, naval artillery became a real nightmare for German troops trying to storm Leningrad. One of the most difficult challenges for Tributs was managing the fleet under conditions of information blockade. Radio communications were often jammed, and landlines were cut during shelling. Under these conditions, the admiral developed a system of redundant communication channels, including light signaling, signal flags, and even pigeon post. For particularly important orders, liaison officers were used, delivering documents personally to the ship commanders. During the war, Tributs' command mastery evolved. If, in the initial period, he often acted intuitively, relying on his experience and naval training, by the middle of the war, his decisions became more systematic and scientifically sound. The admiral carefully analyzed the results of each operation, identifying mistakes and successful solutions, creating a unique bank of tactical techniques. It is noteworthy that Tributs actively encouraged the initiative of his subordinates. He often told ship commanders, "I give you the task, how to accomplish it, decide for yourselves." This approach fostered independent thinking and a willingness to take responsibility in officers. As a result, many commanders of the Baltic Fleet proved to be talented tacticians, capable of acting effectively even when communication with command was lost. Tributs' relations with higher command were not easy. People's Commissar of the Navy, Nikolai Kuznetsov, highly appreciated the admiral's organizational skills, but sometimes criticized him for excessive independence. Tributs was not afraid to defend his point of view if he believed that orders from Moscow did not take into account the real situation in the Baltic. This principled stance sometimes led to conflicts, but ultimately contributed to the adoption of more balanced decisions. A special talent of Tributs was his ability to work with limited resources. Under blockade conditions, every shell, every ton of fuel was precious. The admiral personally controlled the expenditure of ammunition and fuel, demanding economical use of resources from commanders. At the same time, he never skimped on combat operations if they could bring a significant result. Such a rational approach allowed the Baltic Fleet to maintain combat readiness even during the most difficult periods of the blockade. By the end of the war, Vladimir Tributs had emerged as a world-class naval commander who created a unique school of naval combat art in extreme conditions. His experience in commanding a fleet in a limited area, interacting with ground forces, and organizing amphibious operations is still studied in naval academies in various countries. Tributs proved that even under the most unfavorable conditions, a fleet remains a formidable force if led by a talented and decisive commander. The name of Vladimir Filipovich Tributs is etched in gold letters in the history of the Russian Navy. An admiral whose strategic vision and determination helped Leningrad withstand the darkest days of the blockade. He left behind a rich legacy of naval art that is studied even today. His command of the Baltic Fleet during the Great Patriotic War represents a unique example of adapting naval forces to the extreme conditions of a limited water area and close interaction with ground troops. The phenomenon of Tributs as a naval commander lay in his ability to think outside the box. When traditional methods of naval warfare proved inapplicable, he created a new model for using the fleet. The transformation of warships into floating artillery batteries, the organization of ice positions in winter, the integration of fleet and army fire control systems, all these innovations were born out of acute necessity and the genius of the commander. Especially valuable for modern naval science remains Tributs' experience in organizing sea defense under blockade conditions. The system of echeloned defense of sea approaches to Leningrad he created, which included minefields, anti-submarine net barriers, coastal artillery, and ship patrols, became a classic example of a comprehensive approach to defending a coastal area. No less significant is Tributs' contribution to the development of landing operation tactics. The methods he developed for landing tactical assault forces in the enemy's rear, the interaction of Marines with partisans, and artillery support for landings by naval artillery formed the basis of modern amphibious operations theory. His experience in conducting landings with limited resources and enemy air superiority is particularly valuable. Tributs created a unique school for managing submarine forces in complex hydrological conditions. The methods developed under his leadership for submarines to break through mine net barriers, tactics for operating in shallow waters, and organizing basing in the face of enemy opposition, all enriched the theory of submarine warfare. Tributs' ability to organize interaction between the fleet and ground forces deserves special attention. The system he created for adjusting naval gunfire, the deployment of naval liaison officers in Army headquarters, and the coordination of operational plans. These elements of joint actions by different branches of the armed forces are relevant even today. Many modern concepts of joint operations originate from the experience of the Baltic Fleet during the Leningrad blockade. Tributs' most important legacy was his ability to maintain the combat readiness of the fleet in conditions of acute resource scarcity. The organization of ship repairs under enemy fire, the creation of a system of mobile repair brigades, and the rational use of spare parts. This experience is of enormous importance for modern naval forces operating with limited logistical support. Tributs' legacy as a commander extends beyond purely military aspects. His role in organizing the evacuation of Leningrad residents, creating the Road of Life, and supplying the city with food and fuel shows that the fleet can effectively solve humanitarian tasks even in the most difficult conditions. This experience is relevant for modern disaster relief operations and the evacuation of civilians from conflict zones. Today, as naval strategies increasingly focus on operations in coastal zones and limited water areas, Tributs' experience takes on new significance. His methods of fleet management in conditions of enemy air dominance and limited freedom of maneuver are studied by naval specialists from various countries. Vladimir Filipovich Tributs belongs to that constellation of naval commanders whose achievements are not limited to a specific historical period. His strategic vision, ability to adapt to changing conditions, and skill in finding unconventional solutions to the most complex problems make his legacy timeless. The Baltic admiral proved that even in the most unfavorable circumstances, the fleet remains a powerful tool for achieving victory if led by a talented commander capable of seeing beyond today's horizon.